Okay, so I'm Marisha Fraser, and you join us here at the Parhaol Upland Research Centre, where we are doing one of the Farming Connect projects, and this one is all around the potential for feeding clover seed as a way of reseeding pastures. Now, this is something farmers used to do some decades ago, quite popular, but there's no real information on how effective it was. If you look through the scientific literature, there's some results, but they're from overseas countries feeding different species of clover to the ones that we have in the UK. And so then they're also growing them generally in very arid conditions. So we don't know what our white clover varieties and our red clover varieties are going to do, whether they suit this sort of system. So we've got two phases to what we're doing. The first one is testing different varieties of red clover and white clover. So the setup you can see behind, we have 8 individual sheep penned up in pens, all numbered up. We also have a couple of spare sheep, just in case anybody doesn't want to cooperate on the experiment. So they're in as well. And so each of these sheep has been assigned to one of the different clover varieties, and they're getting a gram per day of that together with a sugar beet nut diet. So we had to find a feed that we could add the clover seed to that we knew wouldn't contain any other sorts of seeds, because we want to be able to check whether the seeds go through the animal. Sugar beet they're used to having, and that's hopefully will work quite well. We can dampen the sugar beet and the seeds stick. So we're working with very small amounts. I will show you some clover seed in a bit, just as to how small it is. So the animals will be fed on this for 5 days, just to make sure the clover seed's going through the system. And then we'll start making measurements for a couple of days where we collect all the dung that they produce. So from each of the animals, we'll then subsample some of that. We know how exactly the weight of the clover seed that we've been giving them. We can work out how many seeds per day that would be. We can then subsample the dung and check how many seeds are coming through. Because there's 2 questions really. One is, do the seeds get digested as they go through the sheep? And then if they don't, and if they come out the other end, are they viable to grow? So we subsample the dung to start with, and then the seeds that we find we'll be putting through germination tests to check whether or not they actually germinate. The biggest risk is that they get digested going through. Once this part of the project's complete, we'll then take sheep out into a real field. We'll have a better idea of which varieties to be feeding to do the next phase. And there we expect a system to involve taking the pasture right back, potentially using an Einbach renovation type harrow to clear any old material at the bottom of the pasture, and then we'd just be feeding the sheep with the clover in the seed, and then as it passes through, it's coming out, it's deposited with its own little bit of fertiliser, and then that fertiliser is also acting as a deterrent to stop the sheep grazing the seedlings as they're growing. So we can actually test that in the field then. But for now, we need to know for the different varieties what the germination rates are. This is where all the weighing of the feed and the clover seed happens. So the trays that we have in front here, 8 trays, 1 for each of the sheep, all labelled up underneath. There, number 4. So we split their daily allowance into separate feeds, just to try and make sure they've got continuous food through the day, and that they're getting everything that we want them to have in terms of the amount of sugar beet and the seed. So we've got different varieties here of red clover and white clover. So we have our own Aber varieties. You can see just how small the seeds are. So the amount that we're feeding across the day is basically, it would probably fill a teaspoonful just. So we've got Aber varieties, but we've also got some of the other well-known varieties. So Merviet is another very, very common variety of red clover that's used in mixes, one of the older fashioned type varieties. But we've also, as well as the reds, we've got white clovers. So Aberlasting is one of the newer ones, together with Aberswan. These are doing really well on the recommended lists, and are being used commonly in lots of mixtures. So we weigh out the feed, and then it's, say, feed stew across the day. We moisten the sugar beet nuts to try and make sure that the red clover binds onto the feed, so that we can be sure they've eaten all those seeds. And then once we've collected all the dung, we're going to have the really enjoyable task of trying to sift through, trying to find these little things again. Joy. Science is so glamorous.